On behalf of the Professional Baseball Strength and Conditioning Coaches Society, I'd like to welcome you to the PBSCCS Podcast. I'm your host, Chris Messina.
All right, everybody, I'm here with Pat Trainor of the Tampa Bay Rays organization. Pat, thanks for coming on, man. Appreciate your time. Tell the listeners about yourself, if you would, please.
Right now, my current role with the Tampa Bay Rays, I'm the minor league strength and conditioning coordinator. Started this role going into the 2017 season. Prior to that, I had some time with the Cleveland Indian organization, San Diego Padres, and I had a previous stint with the Rays. I've been at the collegiate setting a couple times as well. So I've kind of been around a little bit here and there. I've got to work at every level pretty much, except for the major league level and professional baseball. So, I've been to a lot of different cities, a lot of different places, roads and buses. So, yeah, it's been good.
Yeah, you come highly recommended from a couple people. Ryan Maydell and Todd Kubacki both told me that you need to get on. Ryan told me that you would talk through the whole episode, which is good. Less talking for me, more for you. So I want to get right into it. We talked a little bit on the phone the other day. I heard you on a previous podcast, and you said that you wanted to discuss in-season programming with me, and more specifically microdosing and biomotor quality. So for any listeners that don't really know what is microdosing, we can kind of start there, explain what that is to you, and then kind of how that relates to baseball, and we'll kind of just let it run from there.
Yeah, so essentially, just my quick definition, it's essentially applying small volumes of maybe a specific type of training to address, specific biomotor abilities that are pertaining to whatever sport that you're in. From that sense, I would say more so how I use it in our system from an in-season standpoint is, baseball is such a skilled sport. There's a ton of other things that kind of go into the training of a player. So it's tough, especially for our life in professional baseball when we're getting these guys in season to really map out like large blocks of when we're trying to train, things along the side of strength and power and speed development, truly develop those things. A lot of programs have been starting to pop up with a lot of organizations in the off season, which is, kind of awesome growth that didn't happen a few years back. So that gives us access to players in the off season where we can, have some time to address these individual qualities of, like I said, strength, speed, power type of abilities. So for me, just in the sense that we use it, it's how we go about to address those abilities while we're working with guys in season. And just make sure that every workout that we have is as specific as possible and not just kind of going with like an anecdotal saying like I'm working on strength here or I'm working on speed power. One thing I tend to tell a lot of my younger staff is that whenever you present me with something along those lines or whenever I hear anybody say, we're doing this because we're trying to address strength. And I'm like, okay, well, define strength of how you're trying to address it, or define speed, define power, and tell me how you're going to assess that ability. Because if you say we're working on this exercise to address rotational power, well, yeah, you're just saying that. So show me, how would you assess rotational power? How would you establish a program, over a certain time frame, and then come back and reassess that quality and show me that it increased rotational power. So I try to, challenge guys on, just from a thinking standpoint of when you make comments along those lines, like have the ability to back it up. Not to get too far off topic, but that's kind of in the sense of what I think of as a workout. In particular in season or during spring training when these guys are going through a ton of, like I said, other skill work. So the microdosing side of things, basically is just finding ways to have a small training stimulus or a small stress that doesn't add to this total volume of work that these guys are doing, and to keep in context more for us, for our sake, in season, right? In season is when we're working with these guys. So, we do want to address all of the needs that we think these players need from, through our assessments. We just have to be really cautious of how we go about that in season, as to it doesn't affect their performance at 7:00 every night. If that makes sense, not to get, again, too long-winded with things.
No, that makes perfect sense, and the more long-winded, the better for me. I don't mind at all. I've listened to Derek Hansen speak a little bit, and he talks a lot about microdosing, and I don't know if I've heard anybody specifically speak about it in professional baseball, and so that's an exciting thing for me to have you talking on the podcast. And so maybe go into kind of what a week would look like, or even a day, or even a workout, or kind of however you would space out, so to speak, these mini workouts, basically.
So just a general overview, first we do some assessments just to see where players are at individually. When they come into, training camp or in season, everybody has different needs. So one individual may fall on a certain spectrum of, maybe they need a little bit more of what we would call starting strength, or the ability for them to accelerate out of a static position. This tends to be like your bigger body guys that we may classify as strong, but you'll hear skill coaches say they need to work on their first step quickness. For example, that's just an example. So, we like to look at essentially the residual training effects when we put together these programs, and how long a certain or a given training effect will last without training at that intensity or load, in high volume. So, for instance, like absolute strength, for an athlete who is highly trained in absolute strength, I'm not talking doing one workout, but an athlete that comes to you in a good position of absolute strength, we don't need to spend a ton of time in a training block, or over a month, or over a week, of like truly working to continue that if you see that they have enough of it. So we may revisit, that method of training, every 3 to 4 weeks, because absolute strength can last, 30 plus or minus 5 days, just an example. The biggest one that has I'll say that we can have the biggest impact on, within our sport, is the speed power continuum, and the ability of players to maintain that. Here's where it gets a little tricky, right? In field court sports, like, we don't have an objective measurement for like sprint speed per se, unless we're using like wearables or you're using StatCast. And, to keep things simple, right? Like track and field, 100-meter sprinter, if he were to take 2 weeks off before his event, there's probably a chance that, his performance isn't going to be as good as it can, because the speed power continuum, you're losing that within 5 to 7, maybe 10 days on like the high end, that guys can go without that. So we can say that players may hit those types of speeds in game, but on what, quantity or what volume, that's where having maybe some more quantifiable objectives like StatCast or wearable technology can help, but we all don't have that. This is where it kind of comes down to our coaches being really mindful of what players do during a given week, how players are performing in games, and, just really paying attention to the game, because that ultimately should impact how you train that individual player. So basically, like I said, that bigger body guy who has like this good absolute strength, or even a smaller body who has good absolute strength, when we're laying out their program for the month, we'll say, hey, out of over a 4-week cycle, you'll roughly get in, let's just call it 8 total body lifts. And this is just an example, over the course of that 8-week cycle, which would be like a general 2 total body workouts in a week. How do we break up those lifts? We don't do the same thing every day. And we also, I think, I try to steer away from that mentality of having like these 4-week blocks of training things in season, right? Because if you're training true absolute strength for 4 weeks, in season, you're probably going to get some fatigue in these players. you may see some gains in a younger player that lacks those types of things, but I'm talking about like the guys who have been training for some time and have hit a point where those things are good enough. The guy is strong enough, or they reach a point of training where they've been with you for a couple months or years, and may not necessarily need to continue to work on that quality. So our lift in season, I would give essentially a few different options for our coaches. And just to kind of keep it short, we'll have 3 workouts. One would be an absolute strength, one would be starting strength, another would be maybe like the speed, strength, or power continuum. And this is just in the weight rooms solely. This isn't stuff that we'll do on field, but we want to make sure that what we do in the weight room, again, has some type of effect to this on-field performance, and we're not just adding work just to do work. We're not adding load to these players' day that could have possibly been spent, in the cage. So a player comes in and his workouts today, hey, our workout's starting strength. So you're going to do some type of jump. You're going to use a really light load on maybe a hex bar deadlift, would be another option, and move it really fast. If you have technology to measure bar speed, like a GymAware or Tendo units or, something along those lines, great. But you could just choose like a lighter load and say, hey, just move this bar as fast as possible. Jump as high as possible with this load. Chances are you're probably going to be hitting those types of speeds that you're looking to address that individual biomotor quality of the strength velocity spectrum. So, that may be one lift. An absolute strength lift may be, in season, typically off season, I would say would probably be above 95% of like a 1 rep max, but in season, we'll say like 80%. And sometimes if we don't have a true number, we'll, ask the player how they feel today and almost use like an RPE scale. Like, hey, what does like a 7 or 8 out of 10 on an effort scale feel like to you? That's where I want you to work up to. I want you to have a few reps left in the tank, but we're gonna push it here. But we don't need to do that every single workout. So that's where I talk about like the micro dosing. Like the volumes of these lifts aren't so big that we're really causing fatigue, and they're not low enough that we're not placing stress. We're just trying to achieve a specific stress as possible to essentially help these athletes maintain the abilities that allow them to, succeed, from an athletic standpoint on the field. Obviously, skill always comes into things, but I'm just talking purely athleticism. A fast player that doesn't hit top speed in a game at his like normal volume, over course of like 5 to 7 days because he's having a rough spell, like you better take that guy out and do some type of, max effort, maybe short sprints. His weight room work better be similar because he's going to get into a game situation at some point in time where, he's going to have to go first to third multiple times. Maybe he's, legging out some doubles or having a couple bags. Like what you don't want is to have this big gap when it comes to, 1, the speed and power output, and 2, the volumes of that speed and power output. You don't want to have big gaps in between, like I said, within their playing schedule. So as a strength coach, that's where I see us coming in and applying these types of stresses. So again, that's not what we do from an entire program, obviously, but that's just like a quick example. Those are 3 things. Like I encourage our coaches, kind of like almost like a West Side philosophy, like we need to touch on multiple qualities, do some end range of motion lifts, do some deadlifts from the blocks or split squats from the rack, jump with load, jump without load, jump with assisted jumps, with like an accelerated band jump. I just try not to think of a workout as being like, all right, you need to go in and do 3 sets of 8 of this and 3 sets of 8 of this. Because to me, like, how much does that really translate into their performance? Maybe it helps maintain some lean mass over the season, but so does having really good lifestyle hygiene and how you take care of yourself off the field. So I'd rather a player have really good lifestyle hygiene and eat well and sleep well and hydrate than have to add extra work to help him burn off some calories because, he's not making the best choices from that standpoint of things.
Yeah, it sounds like a very fluid situation versus like a rigid, okay, you must do this regardless of how you feel, do this, this, this. And I'm sure for your coaches, it's probably good for them because they get to coach. Like if they see something in a game or don't see it, like, okay, because of this in the game, we're going to do this in your workout. And so for your coaches, it probably keeps them on their toes. And for your players, it's probably like, oh, okay, this guy actually cares about me and my situation versus giving me the same program as everybody else.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I lean on our affiliate staff a lot for this because ultimately they're the eyes and ears of the program. You know, you can write up a program from the office at our complex in Port Charlotte, but you know, if our bowling green team just got off the bus, you know, from a 12-hour trip and they've been on the road for 14 days, you know, there's definitely some changes that you want to make because there's probably some type of fatigue related issues going on, or I mean, even Durham, you know, AAA, they make some flights, but those flights are early in the morning. So, you know, if they have a 6 a.m. flight and they finish that previous game the day before at 10, they probably weren't getting home until 11 o'clock to midnight. So, you know, you can assume that, you know, they're losing out on some sleep and they're probably not going to be at their peak level of performance that night or the following day or following day after that. So I think, you know, leaning on the affiliate staff and having them have the, you know, autonomy to make those types of decisions, I think goes a long way. And I think it's, you know, to me, it's necessary. My first year in this role, this is kind of the evolution of it, but kind of going in, the first thing I would do is write up workouts of what I think like our lift program should look like. And it was great because the coach was like, "Oh yeah, I've been following this, and you know we're at this cycle in week 8," and it's like, yeah, but you just were on the road literally for like, you know, like that example in Bowling Green for like 15 days. You know, you haven't had an off day in probably 30 days because they would travel on their off day. I was like, some of these guys, and this is coaching, this is the art of coaching. Some of these, you know, you need to make an adjustment because some of these guys are tired. And you know, again, first year, it was my first year into this role, and the staff was still trying to feel out their role as an affiliate strength coach. And I think the past few years, guys have definitely evolved. And like I said, it provides, to me, I think it provides a more enjoyable experience as a coach because you're not just being robotic and going through the motions and, you know, reading the notebook that someone gave you. It allows you to, you know, express your artistic side with programming, and allows you to, you know, really have like that input on your players because you're responsible for, you know, for these guys. And, you know, I'll take the fall if there's issues and things that I should do better. But at the same time, you know, it really helps to have quality coaches at your affiliates to be able to do these types of things. And over the years, you know, since I've been around, having more full-time coaches and guys returning, like it just makes the coordinator job like unbelievable, you know, a difference as compared to what it was, heck, like 5-10 years ago. You know, when I first started 8 years ago, 9 years ago. So it's come a long way.
Yeah, and it seems like it's very engaging for everybody involved, which is ultimately what you want, job satisfaction wise, and for your players to be satisfied. And if they can vouch for you, hey, these guys actually care for us, they're doing this for us, that kind of just pushes everything forward.
Yeah, absolutely. And another thing too, like, you know, for me, a big part of what we do is like the perception of a strength and conditioning coach by the players, the field staff, by people on the outside. And I think that having something that is very driven to help the player driven to help their on-field performance, and not just, you know, we're running sprints today because that's what I had planned out, but more so like, hey, I'm grabbing these guys and we have to run, you know, he's got to cover this distance or do this amount of volume because we need to touch on these things because he may have not done that in the game, or we have to do this lift today because, you know what, man, like you've been doing max effort back squats like your past 3 or 4 workouts. Like we need to address some other means. Eventually that's going to lead to some fatigue. So I think just like the perception overall of what a strength and conditioning coach should do, and also the perception of, you know, like really how we can help drive player performance and especially in the player development level where, you know, like I said, the mindset used to be, you know, we draft a guy and eventually his body's going to mature into, you know, this major league player. Will, you know, now, when we draft guys, it's like, hey, let's start addressing this guy's skill set as a baseball player. And if that means the first off season he has to spend either at our academy or at our complex, like getting his body and his athleticism in a point where we feel comfortable, that's something that we need to do, because now we don't have to have this like huge, I'll say chunk of the day where we need to devote time towards speed and agility and strength, because we put a big effort into that in the off season. These guys are highly trained in that sense. Now in season, we can find time within these athletes' days that we can microdose and apply just a little bit of a stress, enough to maintain those qualities and continue to grow those qualities over the course of the year. And I guess that's like another thing. Like, there's always that argument between maintaining or growing. And like with anything, I always think it's somewhere in the middle. Your younger players are going to continue to get stronger over the course of the season. But if you have guys older athletes setting PRs in season, they probably didn't do a whole lot in the off season. That would be, they're probably undertrained coming in. Like, I'm talking about guys coming in trained in top shape. Like, that's where I'll say this type of program is going to be really beneficial for. And even for that younger guy where, we may need to spend a couple extra lifts in a month or that first 2 months of the season to build up those strength levels. And then maybe we start to transition into a bigger percentage of their lifts being designated towards like the speed power aspects.
Yeah, a couple things that come to mind just hearing you speak there. First is like, guys only have so much available energy to them, and if they're setting PRs in season, some of your older guys, like, that's probably taking energy from them actually playing the game and being on the field. And then the other thing is like, and I don't necessarily know if you do or don't, but some of the things I've heard about, like microdosing, is one of the downfalls is like the minimum effective dose. Like, what is that dose? Is there any like testing that you're doing or volumes that you're trying to hit within a week or a month, or is it just kind of by feel for each coach at each affiliate? Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah. I think it's, I think it depends on your resources. For us, my first year, we were kind of limited with that, and we've got, we're a little bit more fortunate now. We have gym awares at every affiliate, or we will have it this year, and we've been using them a lot in the off season. I think that gives us like some really objective information through monitoring the individual training sessions, but also there's some jump assessments that you can do on that can kind of give you a little bit of a picture of where guys are at from a readiness standpoint or from a power producing standpoint. Ideally, it would be great, like if you had force plates at every affiliate, but like I said, the cost of that and now even the manpower, right? So now you need a person at every affiliate that, one, needs to understand the complexities of that, needs to designate some time during the day with that, and that's like a big picture that tends to get left out, right? Like, just because we could add catapult, we could add all this different type of wearables. Well, now that pulls away all the time from the strength coach there coaching, because if he's the only guy managing that system or all of these systems, that can be an overload in itself, and you may not get the best out of it. Like I said, fortunate enough for us, we're able to have some gym wears. And like I said, there's a lot of other velocity-based companies, devices that are maybe a little on the affordable spectrum that are able to be used. And it's, like I said, it's just kind of up to the coaches and how you want to apply those types of things in season with your group and how it works with you guys from like a context standpoint. Yeah, I think, ultimately, like for us, that's kind of what we do from a means of making sure that we hit certain volumes, but I don't have a like set scale of we need to hit this type of load or this type of volume, because that's where it becomes individual. Every certain body type, certain makeups can handle more maybe CNS intensive work than others. Some guys may not respond well from high CNS intensive work, and they may respond a little bit more from maybe higher volume. And I'm just talking healthy individuals. I'm not even, digging into what if you have guys that had, previous history of like low back injuries or, hip injuries. That's a whole different, bucket of athletes or of a program that's going to go in for those guys. So, like I said, it's a very broad spectrum, and I think just keeping things in context for how it works with your group, with your athletes, with your setting, with your coaching staff, your affiliates in the space, all those things kind of come into place when you're kind of making those decisions of how you want to essentially use this type of program or use this type of training in season. As far as like a pure volume standpoint, like I said, it's so individual, and there isn't, there's a lot of research, but like you got to look at like sample sizes and how it pertains to your group. I heard a talk on, maybe some negative effects of doing like sprint mechanics of doing wickets, because, athletes can start to put more focus onto driving their knee up versus, ground contact forces. And that may actually negatively affect guys. Well, if you've seen some of the players that I've seen that have these just poor backside mechanics, and there's a language barrier, putting in a drill that is essentially relies on self-organization. I don't have to coach. Pick your feet up over the hurdle when you run through and just don't step on them. I think that's actually going to, work wonders for some of our working on, say a running mechanic issue. So it all falls in context. There is no like 100% absolute. What we use may not work for everybody, but it's kind of what I believe fits in our setting. And like I said, with the coaching staff that I have, the athletes that we have, and organizationally, what we look to do. So.
Yeah, it goes back a little bit to what you said of just everything falls within a spectrum, and I'm kind of in the same boat. Like there are very, very few things, if any, that I've seen that are absolutes of even as something as simple as cueing, like you said. Like some guys respond better to this cue versus that cue, and like although the research may say this doesn't work well, if it works for this guy, I'm going to keep doing it, type of thing. So. Like I said, this is something that I haven't heard many people speak of, if anybody, in baseball, and so I didn't know if you had parameters in anything. And baseball, as we know, is so different and unique in terms of strength and conditioning, just the demands that we have. I didn't know if you were just leaving it up to your coaches and kind of keeping it context specific, which it sounds like you are.
Yeah, I guess, it would be similar for any field or court sport: basketball, American football, soccer, like I said, we don't have that 100-meter time in seconds, or the distance that you threw a javelin. So, like, we don't know the exact parameters of from a sport performance or sport result context of how we're affecting it. But, there's a ton of metrics out there, even with like bat speed and things like that you can look at and see where guys rank in your system based off the assessments that you do. And the assessments, I think, you may have an athlete that has really good absolute strength. Maybe they hit top speed pretty well, but maybe their ability to move a lighter load fast lacks, and also maybe a short acceleration test lacks. So for me, that would put that athlete into an acceleration bucket. There are things that we need to do, whether it's addressing body composition or addressing their ability to accelerate from a standing position, or starting strength, things along those lines. And that is where, like, having these assessments, having this quantifiable value to prescribe a given program for a player versus just anecdotally saying we want to address strength, because strength is a very broad spectrum, and we want to address speed, or we need to address rotational power. Like, all those things are very broad terms. Having some form of assessing those means and seeing how you can impact them, like, that is what I believe should drive every strength coach, within their profession. And it's just when you think you know enough, you realize that you don't know anything, and you got to go back to the chalkboard and draw some things up and figure out how things work in your system. And that may change year to year with players, right? Like, if you have a player that ranked high in all these categories of your assessments, and you're like, yeah, man, here's your training program for the off season. They show up in spring training and they are not the same guy physically. like what you planned on doing with that guy now needs to go back again and, go back to the chalkboard, drawing board and say, all right, this guy didn't come in as fast as we thought, or he didn't come in as strong or as powerful as we thought. We need to address those qualities as soon as possible, because that's going to help carry over to, like I said, hopefully it helps carry over to on-field performance. And, having that integration with your field staff goes a long way. They're always a pair of second eyes and ears as well. If they see things that we may not on field, you need to have that communication, because that's going to help, again, drive those programs. If they're saying guys aren't fast or need to work on agility, or they don't look strong enough offensively, or they're not using their hips when they're throwing, like these are all things, they're all cues that as a strength coach, you don't just take it as is. You need to go back and find out, okay, what did he mean by that? This guy doesn't have good agility. Well, does he lack mobility in his hips or in his body that he can't get into a good defensive position or reach, to make big plays? Is he lacking his ability to accelerate from a standing position, static position? Maybe he just sleeps terrible and he likes to, burn the candle from both ends, and his reactive ability is down, and that may be a big thing. Maybe we need to address those issues, and these are all real things that we deal with. And again, the uniqueness of baseball is that we play every single day. So, playing once a week definitely changes the dynamics of things. But how we play every day, that's where I think, this form of training, or this just form of viewing things through this lens, is what will really help drive success in our program, and hopefully people can take it and figure out how these types of things will work for them.
Yeah, and going back a little bit to what you said there about like coaches saying, oh, he needs more agility, or he needs more this or that, like it's our job to listen to what they're saying and dig in further, because we have that ability. Either guys are going to open up to us about burning the candle at both ends, like you said, or we can use our assessments to say, okay, yeah, that guy is lacking range of motion in his hip, so this is going to help this because this. What the coaches say is very broad, and they have an idea of how the finished product looks to them, and it's our job to kind of help that guy get to that finished product. At least in my mind, I think we have the ability to do that, and the communication and the relationships that we build with players can help us push them to that spot. And then the coaches see them like, yes, this is what I wanted out of this guy. Thank you for helping him. Like, I think it's just a forward-moving circle there in that kind of relationship aspect.
Yeah, absolutely. That's one thing, like I said, to all young strength coaches, man, you can't get stuck in the weight room and have the blinders on of what only goes on in your world. If you're not seeing what goes on the field, if you're not talking to your field staff and skill staff to get their input on guys, those are the types of things that I feel like will have the biggest impact in our profession. So,
yeah, I agree 100%. And not to veer off topic, but Ryan told me that you would have some great stories for me. And so I want to hear your best professional baseball story, because I think we're at a good spot where we can open it up here. Either best memory, something that slipped through the cracks, something that sticks out in your mind as a success, or just, I know you were in Europe for it as well. Your best memory from professional baseball.
I think just a good story, and I won't bring up any names. And this had to do when I was at AAA. I had this pitcher who, was a really good worker, would always go above and beyond in everything that he did. And we would always do, he would always want to go out in maybe after his side day or day before his start. And we would do some true acceleration work, like resisted sprints or, base running starts. And he was a pitcher and American League team. And at AAA, he's never running the bases or getting at bats. And some of the older guys that had been around would wear him out about it. And he didn't mind. We'd still go about his business. This player ended up making his major league debut for a spot start, and he ended up staying up because he was going to go out for 2 starts. It was pretty late in the season. And in between his starts, I think it might have been either his bullpen day or day after, he was kind of on the bench and actually got called in the game to pinch run. And it was funny because after he, eventually came back down and we were talking about it, he's like, I had literally no idea, even how to, I hadn't been on the bases. And he's like, I'm in a big game situation where I got to make a play. And he looks over and he gets like the green light, like the steal. Gets his jump, takes off, slides in head first. And this is a young pitching prospect, so people are losing their mind because he slides in head first. Actually beats the tag, but he slid too late and slid all the way across the bag. And shortstop just reached down and tapped his feet and was like, "All right, you're out, buddy." I thought that was a good serve because I always tell young pitchers this story. Like, this is why pitchers need to be able to run. Like, that opportunity opened front office, opened other coaching staff's eyes. That maybe was a spark to more opportunity for this player. And I always I just think it's a funny story just because how the mindset of pitchers can be, and I'm going back like 6 or 7 years, so a lot has changed in the younger pitchers nowadays, or younger just baseball players nowadays, but of how they train in the off season and prepare. But I always thought that was like a good one because we'd go out and we would do all kinds of form running drills and, like I said, band resisted sprints, all types of stuff. And he would get worn out and he'd be like, someday my time's going to come. And sure enough, he comes back down to AAA and he's got some burn marks in his elbows from sliding across the dirt that he made sure he kept fresh for the season, just to let everybody know.
Yeah, he was probably a hero in your clubhouse when he got back.
Yeah.
I told you guys awesome. I'd get my chance.
Yep, yeah, it was awesome.
So what do you believe in within strength and conditioning that others think you are crazy for believing? I'm really interested to hear your thoughts on this one.
You know what, man? That's a pretty tough question. I think some of my views on pitcher conditioning, in particular starting pitcher conditioning, has changed over time, and I think it kind of is an evolution of how strength coaches have evolved as a profession, more so from track and field coaches, more into weightlifting coaches. And you always hear the saying from everybody like, "Oh, that guy is strong enough. So why does he keep lifting weights? He's a weight room guy." And nobody ever talks about, "Oh, that guy's conditioned enough." So I guess like how I view like a starting pitcher conditioning is, one, have an objective or internal measurement of what actually like a certain conditioning session looks like. Like, and this kind of goes back to like the lifting side of things too, right? Like if you're having a guy run a pole or a half pole or 60-yard sprints or whatever it is that you're doing, have some understanding of what that individual's internal load looks like, what his heart rate looks like. And keep in mind that we always look at, day one as being the furthest from a start day. So we need to have as high volume and high work as possible, but you can't forget that it's also the closest to his previous start day. I don't know any other sport where the day after the game is like their hardest workout day. I mean, I honestly don't know any other sport that does that. So I think that's one thing that I've my opinion is kind of steered towards over the last few years. And the more I kind of dug into things and, dug into a lot of track and field stuff is, what a pitcher's conditioning really should look like. And I know there's a lot of different views and opinions on that. And there's a lot of different, again, context to keep in place based off of body type and things like that. But, just because a guy's body composition is high doesn't mean he's going to have a poor performance in the field. So I think that we don't need to make that guy run more. In fact, running more actually may make him more fatigued. That would be like the example where, hey, we need to address like lifestyle hygiene before we worry about running this guy into the ground because he's getting fatter. Maybe it's because he's eating 2 pizzas a night. It's not to get long-winded. I don't want to dig. That could be a whole nother discussion on our means of conditioning. So.
No, and it's like we talked about, guys only have a limited amount of energy and resources available to them, and if we are pounding them further and further into the ground, it's ultimately probably taking away from what matters the most, which is the game. And like you said, baseball is very unique in the sense that there's so many different body types, and body type doesn't always dictate performance. At times it does. Like you definitely want some guys, okay, hey, if you clean up your body comp, you'll be able to move better, you'll feel better, all of that, but it's not the end-all, be-all limiting factor.
Exactly. And I just want to make sure that it's understood. By no means am I saying that I do not think pitchers should run. I truly believe that. And my definition of distance isn't a pole. Some of the fastest runners in the world run roughly 200 yards, 200 meters. I just want to make sure that I guess I would say understand exactly what you're doing to a player. Understand the stress that you're prescribing before blindly prescribing stresses, over the course of a season. I think that would be the biggest, thing to take from that.
Right on. 100% agree with you on that one. And so in your role as a coordinator, you've obviously hired people and you've seen other strength coaches working under you or with you. And so what is it that makes a strength and conditioning coach successful in your mind? Maybe in general and then more specifically in the professional baseball setting.
Yeah, I think like one of the biggest things to me is there's two things that make somebody good at their job that they do, and one is a knowledge of their craft, and the other would be experience. You can't gain experience totally through reading books and watching what others do and listening to podcasts. Sometimes you need to be in that situation to truly get a grasp of what goes on. Just as an example of that, I've worked in baseball for some time now. I would feel comfortable programming for a player that plays American football. But if I just got hired into American football, I would not know what the day-to-day schedule looks like because I have not been at a collegiate setting to understand exactly like what a full practice looks like. Just like a lot of people that we hire that come in either first or second year guys, or maybe have worked with other sports, or maybe in the private setting, they have no idea about the amount of variables that go into these players' performances. Like I talked about, like the lifestyle, hygiene, travel, sleep, financial issues, being away from, there's so many life stresses. Like there are so many variables that if you have never, been part of that, there's going to be a learning curve. You can't come in and say that you know everything, even if you are the smartest guy, in your field, even if you're a master of your craft in all other means. And the other end of that, I would say, would be, having the drive to want to master your craft. You should never think that you know everything. And I've read a lot of books. I've listened to a lot of people. I've had a lot of, practical experience, but I think there are still things to this day that I need to learn. And there's still things that I'm not great at. And there's always something new, right? Like it's always evolving. So I think gaining experience through work, through internships, if you're a young strength coach, in as many settings as you can possibly see, work with as many sports as you can possibly work with. Don't try to specialize in one when you're early in your career. Same thing that we tell our athletes, right? Like as a strength coach early in your career, I think it's very good to see what other sports are doing. And then, like I said, try to be a master of your craft, reading, learning as much as you possibly can about that. The personality side and things like that, like we need to care about our athletes and we need to be able to communicate with people. But I think sometimes they may be things that you learn through experience, like, I don't know, if you're not the best at communicating, you learn how to communicate over time. You don't come in, graduate college and are the best communicators. Maybe some people are better than that than others, but, next thing you know, you're in a room of like top executives. You better learn how to talk to those guys because the language that you use may be different than you're using with your friends or other strength coaches or athletic trainers or the skill coaches. So I think that that's a big part of essentially just learning how to master your craft.
Yeah, a couple of things there. The first is like when I was coming up, I knew I wanted to get into baseball, but I tried so many other things just to make sure. It was like, okay, give me a reason to not get into it. And then like you work at a private setting, you're like, no, this isn't for me. But there's things that I can take. Okay, I'm at a college setting. I work with a lot of teams. This is good, but I still want to do this. Like for me, it wasn't like specialize early. It was try everything you can, take knowledge from everywhere you can, and then, okay, yes, I was right in my original thought. I do want to get into baseball. And I like you said, we tell athletes not to individualize and specialize early on. And I agree. I think it's the same thing for coaches. Just broaden your horizons and then kind of narrow in instead of starting narrow and then missing out on all that other stuff. And then the other thing, like you said, is when people get into baseball first year, no matter who they are, you just are always shell-shocked by what actually goes on in a day and a week and a month and a year. And there's always that learning curve. And so if you come in and you're not humble enough to admit, like, I have no idea what I'm doing here, you're probably not going to last long.
Yeah, absolutely. My favorite one is, we got to work Saturdays and Sundays.
Yeah, you haven't had a day off since when?
Yeah.
But yeah, 100% right there with you, man. And kind of along those lines, do you have any advice for others in the field? Maybe young coaches looking to get in, or even older coaches that have been around who just want to stay on top of stuff?
Man, just network. Network as much as you can, meet as many people as you can, develop relationships, because you never know, where you're going to end up and how the circumstances are going to, work out for you. It's tough not to, get that like excited feeling like if you get a major league role, but like you're on top of the world. But the second that you forget about everybody else is the second that a new front office comes in and makes changes. It may not even have been, anything within your scope of practice. So I think the more that we can, develop those relationships with people, again, not just in baseball, but all over the place, and never stop that relationship building process, because at some point in time, you may be able to help somebody out, or, you may need some help. So I think those are, some things that every coach should do. And we get so caught up in that, day-to-day life and season that you may not go over and say, hey, what's up to the guy across the field, or you may think that you're competing against him for some reason. But, talk to as many people as you can, because you never know, how your path is going to go, or how that's going to, affect your future.
Yeah, this is that time of year in college football where like new coaches are coming in and they're bringing other staffs, and then other guys are going out, and like you see it every day. And it happens in baseball too, maybe not to the extent, but like you said, you never know who's going to need help or who's going to be able to help you. And if you're networking, great. And if you're not, like, I don't understand I'm competing against a guy across from me. Like when teams come into us, I love to go talk to the guy. Just one, I'm on my island, so I don't have anybody to talk to. Like the guys in the clubhouse don't care about strength and conditioning the way that we do. So for me, it's like I get to get out and go talk to somebody, X's and O's and things like that. So I think that's great advice. I think everybody should be networking. I really don't think there's any reason why you shouldn't be talking to the other guys. So we've been at it for a little while here. I don't want to keep you from your kids and your wife, but if you have time, I'd like to do a lightning round. You got a little bit of time for me?
Yeah, sure.
All right, so first one, who is your biggest influence in the field of strength and conditioning?
You know what? My first experience, I'll say, when I was in at the college level, actually was Mike Barwas. He was the head strength conditioning coach at West Virginia University at the time when I did my internship, and kind of that was like at that point in time I was more steering towards like the rehab setting, and I went in and saw one of the workouts, and I was like, this is awesome. I want to kind of go this route, and like I said, here I am 10 years later. And then Trung Cao, the head guy with the Rays, he's gave me a lot of great opportunities, and he was the first coordinator at the time with the Rays to hire me and bring me on, and now as our major league strength conditioning coach, definitely is kind of helped teach me how the life of baseball, because prior to, same thing, I was a young coach with zero baseball experience outside the collegiate setting. So
one piece of equipment to train with, what would it be?
I'll squat rack. That's easy.
Biggest accomplishment professionally and or personally?
I'll be cliche with it, meeting my wife and having our children. Very life-changing event. You can ask some of my close friends, at some other point in time.
Last one. Any career other than strength and conditioning?
You know what, man? I love to cook in my spare time. That's a little bit of a release of mine. I wouldn't mind, having a restaurant or something like that, I'll say.
So I'll tell you from experience, my dad is a chef, and he used to do the whole thing, and the hours are very similar. So you wouldn't be exchanging for a better family life, per se.
Oh,
but
no.
Cooking is fun. I didn't get the good cooking gene from him. I make very average steaks, and he makes very out-of-this-world steaks. But it is fun to cook and eat your own food like that. So
yeah, that's my wind down when I come home for the day, and get to spend some quality time with the family. So
Yeah, I'm sure they appreciate it. I know I always do
Yeah.
when my old man cooks for us. So, if the listeners want to get in touch with you, where can we get more? Are you on social media, or is there a better place?
You know what? I am on social media. I have Instagram and Twitter, but I mean, honestly, I'm not really big on it. I mean, if you follow me on Instagram, you're just going to see a lot of pictures of my kids, probably. Twitter, I just do to keep up with, see how things are. If you're looking to reach me personally, email ptrainor@raisebaseball.com. It's PTRAINOR @raisebaseball.
Cool. Well, I appreciate you coming on, man, and sharing your thoughts on the microdosing and being so open with me, and we'll be talking soon.
No problem. Appreciate it, Chris. Thanks.
All right, everybody, that concludes this episode with Pat. I hope you enjoyed this one. I always like when coaches come on and are very open and honest with me and are willing to share their thoughts. And I appreciate Pat sharing his thoughts on microdosing and in-season programming. 3 things that I took from Pat in this episode: understand the stresses that you are prescribing, have the drive to want to master your craft, and avoid being stuck in the weight room all the time. With that being said, I hope you enjoyed this episode, and we'll talk to you again on the next one.